this is not an anger management seminar, but especially if you're not in the field of mental health, you should know a couple of things that the peer-reviewed literature is very clear on. First, let's go back to this idea of separation between the stressors. Now, there is really amazing data showing the health benefits of getting this separation. And one of the striking studies that's been done, Karen Matthews at the University of Pittsburgh she's devoted her life, really, her career, studying women's cardiovascular health and stress. Now, the study was actually done by Gump, Matthews, and 3 or 4 others, but they did a secondary data analysis of the Mr. Fit trial. Now, the Mr. Fit trial was a nationwide clinical study that took only men in their 40s at high risk of developing cardiovascular disease. And the trial was about looking to see the impact of diet and exercise. But Gump, Matthews, and their team didn't look at the impact of changing diet and increasing activity for decreasing risk of disease. They instead wanted to predict outcomes at the end of the 9-year study based on just the response to one question on the first day of the study. And the question was, how often do you take a vacation? Now, keep in mind, these are all men at high risk of developing disease. But compared to the men who said they took a vacation once a year, the guys who said they took a vacation only every other year were nearly 40% more likely to be dead 9 years later. The guys who said they took a vacation only every 3rd year or less often were nearly 50% more likely to be dead within a decade. The most common cause of death, sudden cardiac death. Now, you want to take that data into work tomorrow and go, hey, I need a vacation now. Right? Well, okay, vacations are all well and good, but how about being more realistic? How do we translate that research into something actionable? Well, we're learning maybe we should do something more often with ourselves that apparently we can do very well with 3-year-olds. Take a time out. What's a time out but a 5-minute vacation? Right? It doesn't matter if it's video solitaire, video poker. Walk to the end of the hallway and get a cool glass of water. Take a stroll around the block once. It's appearing more on questionnaires predicting cardiovascular disease. The question is, how many times a day do you give yourself a time out? Now, chilling out and visualization. What am I referring to? Well, if the evidence is clear at all, it basically says if you're trying to help a person manage their anger better, do not have them pretend that they're baking in the sun on a deserted island, right? Why? Because heat influences the interpretation of arousal. Studies, classic ones done 40 years ago, but they're replicated every few years, showing that, if we could inject you with epinephrine, you feel more aroused, more agitated, kind of upset, nervous. Those are the words you use to describe how you feel. We have you come back the very next day, do the same thing, but this time all we've done is elevate the room temperature 4 degrees Fahrenheit. You're not saying you're nervous or upset. You're saying you're annoyed, you're ticked off, you're perturbed. Okay? So instead of images of heat, focus on cool images. Literally, you're sitting in a cool mountain stream with the water rushing by you. You are sitting in, southern Canada in February on a park bench with no sweater or jacket on, right? Something that's cooling images. But the clinical literature actually directs us to do something yet quite different. And that is based on the evidence that people who score really high on hostility tend to have a propensity to blame others for their feelings. I was fine. She made me angry, right? So let's get away from that and say, example, Kevin, you say you're kind of hot under the collar, burning mad. Okay, where do you feel that heat most? And let's spend 5 or 10 minutes pretending that there's an ice cube that's slowly cooling it off, or there's a micro fan imaginarily pushing away the hot air, bringing in cool air. Those cooling images that are focused on self-regulation, that's kind of the skill we're trying to impart on these folks. The AAA model of mood management, that's my own little way to steal from the Automobile Association of America. This is based on the data that clearly demonstrates this is as effective for anger reduction as it is for managing anxiety. The first A is awareness. You increase awareness through assessment. Why? Because we'll see people with a lot of anger management problems tend to over-rely on distraction, avoidance, denial. Oh no, I'm not really upset. But they're grinding their teeth, muttering under their breath. So you want to have them increase their awareness by assessing more often. Why? Because if you're aware that your anger has gone from a 2 to a 3, a 3 to a 4, almost everything I have available to me as a psychologist is going to be more effective than if you wait until you're a 9 or a 10 and ready to blow, right? So maybe it's, I don't know, every hour. Do a quick 5-second check-in. Am I as perturbed as I was last hour? Has it gone up from a 3 to a 4? If so, intentionally, do I want to do something about that? The second A here is action. If there's something to do, then act. Take action if it's effective. But if there's nothing that I can do out there or change the situation by my actions, what am I left with? But the third A, which is acceptance. Now, whether that be acceptance commitment therapy approaches, mindfulness, CBT approaches, dialectical approaches, whatever it might be, how do I kind of not only calm myself down, but start a healthy questioning of, wow, why am I so upset? Might there be some distorted way I'm thinking about things? Am I truly making a mountain out of a molehill? Am I assuming a sense of urgency when there really is no sense of urgency? There is no deadline. It's my internal kind of default to think that I have to do things really quick. Kind of in line with that, the two most common cognitive distortions or patterns of thinking we see most often in those who score high on cynical hostility, one is the fallacy of fairness. Everything comes through the filter of whether it's fair or not. Justice must be done all the time. If you're not following my rules, then that is a clear reason why I'm justified in being angry and maybe even aggressive. Second, very common kind of distorted way of thinking for those who struggle with anger is mind reading. Now, as a psychologist, I'll tell you, I'm not even close to 50% of the time knowing what people are thinking. We, however, generally assume we know what people's motives are. And we proceed and never really question the accuracy of those assumptions. Well, if you want the fastest way to go from stress to rage and fury, assume the other person, their action, they intended to mean you harm, right? Because if you're trying to go on the highway and people are trying to merge, if someone cuts you off, if you think they did that intentionally, anger will escalate extremely fast. But if in fact we can say, well, now, we don't really know if it's true or not, but an alternative way of thinking, it's possible that he was oblivious to me being there, that I actually had the right of way. He didn't mean me harm. Maybe he was distracted because he was just called by his wife that she's gone into labor to deliver their first child, or anything like that. Those kinds of strategies can be awfully effective. Now, there's a lot of different ways to kind of express our anger. Shall I say some are more appropriate than others? Now, my apologies to any guy who has lost his sports car to his ex-wife, but that I thought was rather apropos there.